Hello. Today we're going to look at the introduction to learning. I know we are already well and truly into learning, but still we're going to have to go back to the start, a bit of revision about what it all means. Okay, so this should be a short video about learning, and funnily enough, we're going to look at behaviours that have nothing to do with learning in order to start us off. Okay, so first of all, let's start with the definition. Okay, so what is learning? A really important textbook definition here. A relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs as a result of experience. That's going to be really important as you go back through all your stuff on learning. Okay, it's a relatively permanent change, which means once the behavior has been learnt, it's pretty much there for a very, very long time. Okay, also it has to occur as a result of experience. All right, and that's the other really key point. Okay, so sometimes you have behaviors that will just occur. Okay, sometimes they're state dependent. Sometimes you might do something as like a once-off. If you can't replicate that, then it's usually not considered learning. Okay, two other key points there: that learning can be intentional or unintentional. You don't necessarily have to be really engaged in learning, like sitting down in class in order to learn something. And that has to do with these two terms down the bottom, which you can see. Learning can be active or it can be passive. Okay, you will know that classical conditioning is passive learning. Okay, and active learning is observational learning and operant conditioning. So, in terms of a graph, what does learning look like? Well, you can see it here, kind of an S-curve. Okay, and it has to do with practice and learning. So, basically, you can show an increase in performance over a period of time as practice occurs. Alright, so down the bottom there you can see at first there is a bit of a lull, it's a gradual increase, you can see that there. Then there's a point in the middle where it speeds up, a dramatic amount of information occurs and your performance increases. Okay, you guys are in that stage at the moment. And then finally you get that plateau, which you can see there, and that is pretty much where your learning levels off. That's about as much as you can take in and about as good as your performance can get. That's where you guys are going to be by the time you hit your exam. Okay? So, now that we have some idea about what learning is, what are some behaviors that we do or that we see that are not dependent on learning? So these are things that happen naturally, that naturally occur, that aren't dependent on learning. The first one is a reflex action. Okay, the definition there is reflex does not require prior experience and occurs in the same way every time. The most simple example for this is when you put your hand on something really, really hot. Okay, you don't have to think, oh, that's hot, what should I do now? Your hand automatically comes straight away from whatever it is, the hot plate or the hot stove or the hair straightener or whatever. Okay? The second type of thing is what we call a fixed action pattern. Now, this is a different kind of thing. The reflex actions are relatively simple behaviors. Okay, something's hot, move your hand. Okay, if something gets blown in your face, close your eyes. Those things are very simple behaviors. Okay, a fixed action pattern occurs when all members of a species produce an identical response to the same specific environmental stimuli. Okay, so this is where a whole species reacts in the same way. Okay, and some of the behaviors can be quite complex. Okay, they are species-specific behaviors, so usually other species don't share them, and the mechanisms that control this type of behavior are fixed, so they're genetically programmed. Okay, all the animals in that species have this ability. Okay. It's important to note that humans no longer really have fixed action patterns. We don't need fixed action patterns. Okay, we've evolved beyond that, and this is mainly just a basic animal type phenomena. Just to recap, all members of the species, okay, or a sex of that species, demonstrate the behavior. For example, all female praying mantises, after they have relations with the male partner, then bite their heads off. I don't know why, that's just what they do. Also, the behavior is similar, okay, so whenever it gets executed, doesn't matter which type of animal, it's all very extremely similar behavior. This is an important one, and we're going to talk about maturation in a minute. But when an organism reaches the right level of maturation, or the right stage of development, it will produce the behavior for the first time as it is required without having learnt it. Right? That's really important. So once an animal gets to a certain age or developmental stage, it can just produce that action, okay, or that pattern of actions. Okay, it doesn't have to learn it. It doesn't have to watch anybody. It doesn't have to be taught it. It just does it. Okay. The behavior is very difficult to change, as with the reflex, and the behavior is complex. It's usually a sequence of responses. For example, the bee. Remember I told you stories of honeybees, that return to the hive to tell other worker bees where the honey is. Okay, this bee here is a bumblebee. It's not actually a honeybee, but I thought it was a cuter photo than the other bees. But the point is, the bee will come back, and if it's far away, if the pollen is far away, it will do a specific type of dance. If the pollen is close, it will do a shorter version of that dance to imply that the pollen is a lot closer. Okay? Now, bees don't need to be taught that. This is something that they naturally do once they reach a certain age. Okay, so that's important. The next one is salmon. At a certain stage of the year, to spawn, okay, so to lay their eggs, salmon come in from the sea and they swim upstream, up rivers, okay, and they actually can get up quite high waterfalls and stuff like that. It's quite an amazing thing, okay. So the external stimuli is the mating season, okay, which means certain temperatures in the water. Then all salmon respond to this temperature change and time of year by swimming from the sea up streams to a safe place to lay their eggs. Okay, so that's really important. So that's a fixed action pattern. It's a certain specific behavior that all salmon do. It's quite complex. It's quite a hard task to get upstream. Okay, and it's made even harder because there is another set of animals that have developed a fixed action pattern. Okay, at the same time that salmon start to swim upstream, bears start to hang out in streams. Okay, and they hang out in streams because they know there is going to be a whole bunch of salmon coming up the stream and hopefully onto their dinner plates. Okay, yet another fixed action pattern. The bears don't need to listen to other bears. They don't need to learn this. There's something that over time they've developed that they do. So they will leave excuse me, they will leave their environment at a certain time of the year, and they will make sure that they are around these streams, populated streams that salmon swim up at specific times of the year, so they can get basically an all-you-can-eat buffet. So, questions are, how is a reflex different to a fixed action pattern? Well, what's the most obvious one is that the fixed action pattern is a lot more complex. Okay, it's a complex behavior, okay, that requires maturation, and the reflex isn't. That's the major difference there. Okay, how are fixed action patterns and reflexes similar? Well, usually pretty much the response is always the same. Okay, so the response is similar across all members of that species. Okay, and also no learning has to occur. That's the other similarity. You don't have to learn either of those things. They just happen. Okay. The last thing that underlines both of those reflex actions and fixed action patterns is the idea of maturation. Okay. Now maturation, if you even look at the word, it has pretty much, it's based on the word mature. Okay. And what we are talking about here is a developmental process leading towards maturity based on the orderly sequence of changes that occur in the nervous system and other bodily structures controlled by genetic inheritance. So, a 6-month-old cannot run 400 meters. Okay? A 6-month-old cannot do chin-ups. Okay? And a 1-year-old cannot sing opera. Alright? These are all things that require maturation. So, it doesn't matter how clever that baby is or anything like that, you need to be able to have the neurons and other parts of the body to have grown and developed sufficiently or enough so that you can do those things. Okay? So there is a reason why little babies can only wriggle their feet but can't sit up at a very, very early age. It's because the neurons and the neural pathways that control the muscles to that area haven't really grown yet to send proper messages, and the muscles aren't strong enough yet for the baby to sit up straight. Okay, that happens at a certain time. Same with vocal cords. Okay, we have vocal cords and they produce sound. I'm sure you've heard your baby brothers, or sisters, and nephews and nieces screaming. Okay, they work, but in order to control the muscles of the mouth, to control the tongue, to be able to control the vocal cords, okay, it requires certain neuron growth that doesn't happen until a certain age. Okay, so about one, a little bit after one, can they start to say words and control their sounds. All right, so that's really, really important. So you can see here that maturation is a set of responses that depend on genetic influence. Okay, you have to be able to grow certain things. You have to be able to develop in a certain way. Okay, they generally appear at predictable times. We're going to talk about this when we look at the next video, which is the role of the neuron in learning. But basically, you have these critical periods. At 6 months, you can roughly begin to crawl. Okay, and there are other developmental stages. It's important to note that there is no amount of practice that will hasten the onset or significantly influence the course of development. So you can't sit your kid in one of those little, in one of those little, they're like little swings that you attach to the door so the kid can kind of stand up. I don't know if you've seen, it's like a harness. Or one of those little things that you sit them in like a chair and they can roll around on the ground and with the wheels on it. None of those things make the kid walk any quicker, okay? Because they're physically not able to walk yet. So they can't begin to learn to walk if they haven't developed the leg muscles or the neuron pathways for balance down in the legs and the feet. All right. So that's it on maturation. And so it's important to remember there are a few things that do not depend on learning. All right. Reflex actions, fixed action patterns, and maturation. Okay, these are things that naturally occur and they usually happen across a whole species and they are not dependent on learning. All right, that'll do, and we'll move on to the neurons very, very soon. Bye.